The surgical resident stumbled backward, hand clamped over his mouth. A metal instrument clattered against the sterile floor. "Get the trauma team! Now!" "Doctor!" Rachel Carson's voice cut through the operating room like a blade. The nurse's fingers trembled as she reached for the emergency call button on the table. Thomas Brennan lay sedated. His neck split open under harsh fluorescent lights. A heart monitor beeped erratically in the corner. "Doctor!" Carson held the forceps steady, staring at what she'd just extracted from deep within her patient's tissue. 25 years. The thought echoed in her mind as she studied the twisted metal, the fabric fibers still clinging to its surface, the dark wood splinters embedded in oxidized steel. "How is this possible?" the young resident whispered, face drained of color. The object gleamed under the surgical lamp, a chisel tip, wrapped in plaid flannel, preserved like a time capsule inside human flesh. The screen faded to black 4 days earlier. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The mop bucket's wheels squeaked against the linoleum, a sound Thomas Brennan had heard 6 days a week for 18 years. Monday morning at St. Mary's Medical Center arrived the same way it always did, gray Portland rain streaking the windows, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the sharp smell of disinfectant cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Tom pushed the mop in steady, mechanical strokes down hallway B. 56 years old, salt and pepper hair thinning on top, shoulders perpetually stooped from decades of manual labor. His Navy maintenance uniform hung loose on his frame, the name patch faded from countless washings. The wedding band on his left hand had worn so thin the engraving inside was barely visible. His right hand rose to his neck. Again, he scratched through his collar without thinking, a motion that had become as automatic as breathing. The skin beneath felt hot, swollen. He'd been doing this for weeks now, maybe longer. Time blurred when you spent your days invisible. A doctor rushed past, eyes glued to her tablet, nearly colliding with his bucket. She muttered, "Sorry," without looking up. Tom stepped aside, waited for her to pass, then continued mopping. Dr. Rachel Carson, the badge had read, surgical attending. She wouldn't remember this moment. Nobody ever did. He paused mid-stroke, closing his eyes as pain radiated up his neck into his jaw. The sensation had been getting worse. What started as a minor itch 3 weeks ago had evolved into something angrier, more insistent. His fingers found the raised area again, pressing gently. Heat pulsed beneath his skin. From his pocket, Tom pulled out a nearly empty tube of hydrocortisone cream. He'd been applying it religiously, but the inflammation only spread. Deep down, in a place he tried not to examine too closely. He knew this wasn't a rash. This was something else. The elevator dinged. Emily Chen stepped out, her nurse's scrubs crisp despite the early hour. She was young, 26, maybe 27, with the kind of observant eyes that actually saw people. For weeks, she'd noticed the maintenance man scratching his neck. Today, their paths would intersect in a way that would change everything. In Tom's apartment across town, a single key sat on the counter, no key ring, no attachments. His phone showed 3 voicemail notifications, all automated system messages. The refrigerator contained 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 fork drying in the dish rack. In the closet, 3 identical work uniforms hung beside 2 civilian shirts. On the top shelf of that closet, hidden in a shoebox, lay an envelope addressed to Margaret in Tom's careful handwriting. The date read November 15th, 1999. The envelope had never been opened, never been sent. The emergency contact field on Tom's hospital badge remained blank. It had been blank for 2 years, the same amount of time since he'd last spoken to his wife. Tom returned to his mopping, unaware that in less than 3 hours a young nurse would refuse to let him stay invisible any longer. By 8:15 that Monday morning, Tom Brennan's right hand had scratched his neck 43 times. He'd stopped counting after that. The maintenance closet on the second floor offered a moment of privacy, away from the fluorescent glare of the hallways. He leaned against the concrete wall, vision blurring at the edges. When he touched his neck, the heat radiating from his skin made his fingers recoil. He examined his hand under the closet's bare bulb. Dark crescents of dried blood lined his fingernails. He'd scratched through the skin barrier during the night without realizing it. Jesus! Tom! Walter Morrison stood in the doorway, keys jangling from his belt. The maintenance supervisor was 62, had worked at St. Mary's for 30 years, and possessed the kind of straightforward manner that came from seeing too much to pretend otherwise. "How long's that been like that?" Walter gestured at Tom's neck. Tom pulled his collar higher. "Just a rash, week or two." "That ain't no rash. That's infected." Walter stepped closer, squinting at the visible inflammation. "You need that looked at. We got a whole hospital here." Tom grabbed his mop bucket, moving toward the door. "Got cream for it." "Tom, I'm fine. Been fine for 56 years. Walter watched him go, shaking his head. Tom pushed his cart faster, the wheels protesting. His throat felt tight. The walls of the hallway seemed to press inward. At the intersection, near the elevator bank, he didn't see Emily Chen rushing around the corner with an armful of supply requisitions. The collision was minor. His cart caught the edge of her lab coat, but it stopped them both cold. "I'm so sorry, they said simultaneously. Emily stepped back to untangle her coat, and in that moment, she got a clear view of his neck. Her professional training kicked in instantly. The raised area measured roughly 5 by 7 centimeters, erythema spreading in irregular patterns, a dark central point that could be eschar or something worse. Most concerning, the skin appeared to radiate heat, visible even in the cool hallway air. "Sir?" Her voice shifted from apologetic to clinical. "I'm a nurse. That area on your neck needs immediate medical attention." Tom backed away. "It's nothing." "I've seen cellulitis progress to sepsis." Emily moved to block his path. "You work here. You know what untreated infections do." His hand tightened on the cart handle. Over Emily's shoulder, he could see the maintenance office, his escape route. His throat constricted further. Memory flashed an emergency room in 1999, bills arriving for months afterward, credit destroyed. He'd sworn never again. But Emily was already taking his elbow, gentle yet firm. "Come on, here, right now." "I'm working. This is your work right now, staying alive." She radioed her supervisor, speaking quickly. "Taking patient to ER. Medical emergency." "I'm not a patient." "You are now, Mr." She glanced at his name badge. "Brennan." The emergency room bay smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Tom sat on the examination table while a nurse practitioner took his vitals. Blood pressure 148/90, heart rate 90, temperature 98 degrees when she palpated the neck mass. Tom jerked away involuntarily. Pain shot through his shoulder like electricity, fluctuant, warm, very tender. The NP murmured, making notes. She examined the area with a penlight, frowning. This presentation is atypical. 10 minutes later, Dr. Rachel Carson entered the bar. She was the same doctor who'd nearly collided with Tom's bucket that morning. Though she showed no sign of recognition, she examined his neck from multiple angles, her expression shifting from concern to puzzlement. She photographed the lesion, measured it with calipers, documented everything with methodical precision. She tested the skin's mobility restricted, checked nearby lymph nodes slightly enlarged, performed a neurological assessment sensation intact, no deficits. Finally, she rolled a stool to Tom's eye level. Mr. Brennan, any recent trauma to this area? Tom shook his head. Insect bites, puncture wounds. Not that I remember. Any surgery here? Old injuries? Tom's jaw tightened. A flicker of something memory. Perhaps pain crossed his face. Long time ago. Workshop accident. Mechad. Darn, Carson wrote a careful note. We need imaging. This isn't a simple abscess. What do you think it is? She didn't answer directly. Let's get a clear picture first. After Dr. Carson left, Tom sat alone behind the half-closed curtain. Hospital sounds filtered in monitors beeping, overhead pages, distant conversations. He pulled his phone from his pocket and stared at the contact list. Mom, deceased 2019. Pizza Hut, landlord, hospital main, 4 contacts for a 56-year-old life. His thumb hovered over a number, not saved one he'd memorized years ago. Before the separation, Margaret Brennan, Maggie. His wife of 46 years, though they'd lived apart for 2. He imagined calling her, explaining he was in the ER, that something was wrong. Imagined her voice, would it be warm or cold, concerned or indifferent? He put the phone away without dialing. The curtain rustled. A young technician appeared with a wheelchair. Mr. Brennan, radiology is ready for you. Tom stood slowly, his neck throbbing with each heartbeat. As he settled into the wheelchair, he touched the inflamed area one more time. Beneath his fingers, 25 years of silence pulsed with a life of its own. The ultrasound suite was dim, lit only by the glow of monitors. Tom lay on the examination table, shirt removed, cold gel spreading across his neck. Linda Hewitt, the ultrasound technician, had been doing this for 27 years. She'd seen abscesses, cysts, tumors, foreign bodies of every variety. Nothing surprised her anymore. Until now, the transducer glided across Tom's skin, and the image on the monitor resolved into gray and white patterns. Linda's hand stopped moving. She stared at the screen, adjusted the settings depth, gain, frequency, tried a different angle. The same confused expression deepened on her face. Let me try one more pass, she said quietly. Tom watched her face instead of the monitor. The shapes on screen meant nothing to him, but her reaction told him everything. When she finally set down the transducer and printed multiple images without speaking, his chest tightened. Mr. Brennan, I need to get the radiologist. Stay here. She left quickly. Images clutched in her hand. Tom remained on the table, staring at the frozen image on the screen, a hypoechoic collection, dark area indicating fluid. but within it, something bright white, casting a shadow behind it, even to his untrained eye. It looked wrong. The ultrasound machine hummed. Tom's mind drifted to his grandfather, diagnosed with neck cancer at 57. Tom was 56. The math felt ominous. 45 minutes later, he sat in a different waiting room with a hospital gown tied loosely around his shoulders. His street clothes sat in a plastic bag at his feet. The clock on the wall moved with geological slowness. A court show played on the muted television. An elderly woman across from him looked at him with sympathy he didn't want. He picked up a pamphlet from the side table. Understanding Head and Neck Cancers. The words blurred. He set it down, hands shaking slightly. The CT scan itself took only minutes, but they stretched like hours. The technician positioned Tom carefully, instructing him not to swallow or move. The machine whirred, the table slid through the donut-shaped scanner, and Tom held his breath, even though he didn't need to. When it was over, the tech told him the radiologist would review the images and send them to his doctor, usually an hour. He said, Tom was sent to another waiting area, a purgatory of plastic chairs and old magazines. He watched other patients. A man sat with his wife, their hands intertwined. A woman laughed at something on her daughter's phone. An elderly man discussed fishing plans with his son. Everyone had someone. Tom pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts again. His thumb hovered over Margaret Brennan's name, the number he'd never deleted despite 2 years of separation. He could call her, tell her where he was, ask her to come. He set the phone face down on the chair beside him. At 2:30, he got water from the cooler for the third time. At 3 o'clock, a maintenance worker passed through with a floor buffer, recognized Tom in his hospital gown, and gave an awkward wave. Tom nodded back. The role reversal felt surreal, unsettling in a way he couldn't quite articulate. At 3:15, his name was finally called. The consultation room was small and windowless, a desk, a computer monitor, 2 chairs, and a box of tissues that felt like a bad omen. Anatomy posters covered the walls. The air smelled recycled and stale. Dr. Carson entered carrying a tablet, her expression serious. She sat across from Tom and opened the imaging on her screen, turning the monitor so he could see. Mr. Brennan, thank you for your patience. She pointed to the black and white cross-section of his neck. This is your tissue here, and this is the mass. A bright white object stood out clearly against the surrounding gray, linear, distinct, alien. This is not a tumor, Dr. Carson said carefully. It's not an abscess. Relief and confusion washed over Bob simultaneously. Then what? This is a foreign body, a retained object, something metallic that's been lodged in your tissue for a significant period of time. Tom leaned forward, staring at the screen. That's inside me. Yes, based on the capsule formation around it. She zoomed in, showing the ring of tissue surrounding the object. This has been there for years, possibly decades. His hand went to his neck, as if he could feel it now that he knew it was there. How long? I can't say exactly without removal, but the body's response suggests this is old. She pulled up another image. It's approximately 2.3 centimeters long, located in the subcutaneous tissue of your lateral neck, very close to your internal jugular vein. She pointed to an adjacent structure, and her meaning was clear, without elaboration. If it shifted, If the infection spread, Mr. Brennan, you mentioned 1999, a workshop accident. What happened exactly? Tom closed his eyes. The smell of wood stain filled his nostrils, a phantom sensation from a quarter century ago. The sound of a drill, Maggie's voice, distant and angry, metal clattering, sharp, sudden pain. I fell, he said slowly, hit my head, neck area, went to the emergency room. Did they take x-rays? Tom shook his head. I refused. Insurance had lapsed. Couldn't afford it. He opened his eyes. They stitched me up. It hurt for a while, but it healed, or I thought it did. Dr. Carson made notes. What were you working on? What tools were nearby? Woodworking, chisels, saws, drill. We were converting the workshop into... He stopped. There were tools everywhere. She nodded, writing more. Then she looked at him directly. We need to remove this soon. The infection you're experiencing isn't just from the object itself. After this long, bacteria can colonize the foreign body. If it spreads to your bloodstream, sepsis. Tom finished quietly. Yes, I'll schedule you as urgent. Within 48 hours, she pulled out consent forms, surgical information sheets, the paperwork of modern medicine. I need your emergency contact information. Tom stared at the blank line. His pen hovered above the paper. Dot. Carson waited patiently, but he could feel her watching him. Is there someone we can call? She asked gently. The silence stretched. Tom's hand moved slowly, forming letters he'd written thousands of times before Margaret Brennan. He added her phone number from memory, her address different from his own for 2 years now. Carson took the form. We'll call her with the surgery schedule. After she left, Tom sat alone in the small room. 25 years. The object had been inside him for 25 years. The same amount of time he'd carried something else. A silence so profound it had hollowed out his marriage, driven away his son, left him invisible even to himself. He touched his neck one more time, feeling the heat, the swelling, the body's desperate attempt to expel what didn't belong. Some wounds, he thought, the body knows how to heal. Others require surgery. He just hoped he'd survive long enough to find out which kind this was. Tom's apartment building had no elevator. 3 flights of stairs had never bothered him before. But tonight, each step sent jolts of pain through his neck and into his jaw. His hand trembled as he fitted the key into the lock. The door swung open onto 400 square feet of carefully maintained emptiness. Studio apartment, Northeast Portland, older building with thin walls and radiators that clanged in winter. The space held everything Tom owned and revealed exactly how little that was. A kitchenette along one wall, a bed pushed against another, a single chair facing a small television, no photographs, no decorations, a calendar hung by the door showing only work schedules, no personal appointments, no birthdays circled. He moved through his evening routine with mechanical precision, changed from his hospital clothes into sweatpants and an old t-shirt, microwaved a frozen chicken pot pie, ate it, standing at the counter while the television news played to an audience of 1. His phone sat on the counter beside his plate. He stared at it between bites. Margaret's number was still memorized. After 46 years of marriage, Some things became permanent, even when the marriage itself fractured. He picked up the phone, set it down on the fifth attempt. He dialed the first 3 digits before his thumb froze over the numbers. Memory crashed over him their last real conversation 2 years ago, her voice saying, "I can't do this anymore." His responsive silence, because silence was all he knew how to offer. He erased the numbers and carried the phone across the room, setting it on the nightstand as if distance would make it less tempting. The closet held his entire wardrobe. 3 identical Navy maintenance uniforms, 2 civilian shirts, 1 pair of jeans. On the top shelf sat a shoebox that hadn't been opened in months. Tom pulled it down now, sitting on the edge of his bed with the box in his lap. Inside photographs from the workshop, back when it was still his. Emily's hospital bracelet, not Emily, his daughter, but Emily the nurse who dragged him to the ER today. No, not that Emily. His daughter, Emily, the one who died at 5 from leukemia, the one whose death had started everything unraveling. Her tiny bracelet, with her name printed in faded ink, Emily Rose Brennan. Beneath the bracelet lay an envelope addressed to Maggie in his careful handwriting, dated November 15th, 1999, never opened, never sent, carried from house to apartment like a talisman of failure. He held it without reading it. He knew every word. He'd rewritten it 17 times before settling on the version inside. At the bottom of the box, another envelope. Divorce papers from 20 prepared by Maggie's lawyer, sent to him for signature, still unsigned. He'd told himself he needed time to read them carefully. The truth was simpler. Signing them made the end real, and he'd spent his whole life avoiding things that were real. Tom replaced everything carefully and returned the box to its shelf. By 8:30, exhaustion pulled him toward sleep. He swallowed 4 ibuprofen and lay down, neck throbbing in rhythm with his pulse. When sleep came, it brought no peace. The workshop materialized around him with dream logic clarity. Wood shavings covered the floor of the toilet. The radio played "You Send Me" by Sam Cooke, the song that had been their wedding dance. Maggie's voice echoed from somewhere, "You don't care. You don't even see me anymore." His own voice answered, "I can't fall apart, not now. Someone has to hold this together." Little Emily, 5 years old, still healthy, before the cancer laughed as she built towers from wood scraps. Her small hands stacked them carefully, her tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when she focused. The dream shifted. The ladder tilted in slow motion. Maggie's face appeared below him, but her expression was anguish, not anger, a metallic flash. Pain blooming sharp and then spreading like spilled wine. Blood warm on his neck, his shoulder soaking through his flannel shirt. Emily's stuffed rabbit fell from a shelf, landing in the pooling blood. The workshop walls melted and reformed into hospital corridors. The chisel in his hand became a scalpel. "Doctor!" Carson's face loomed. "Why didn't you tell her?" Maggie stood in the doorway. "Why didn't you let me apologize?" David's voice, his son's voice, he hadn't heard in 8 years. "I thought you didn't love me anymore." And Emily, the daughter, 20 years gone. "Daddy, why are you carrying that?" She pointed at his neck. Tom looked down. The wound gaped open. Inside, he could see a miniature workshop everything broken, wood split, tools scattered. He woke at 2:17 in the morning, bolting upright, sweat-soaked and gasping. The streetlight through his window cast everything in amber and shadow. His hand went to his neck, found the bandage the hospital had applied, real, present, alive. The rain had started again, drops tapping against glass like fingers seeking entry. Across town, in a small craftsman bungalow in southeast Portland, Margaret Brennan stood in her converted garage studio, surrounded by paintings of broken things. The room smelled of linseed oil and turpentine. A space heater hummed in the cold corner, fighting the November cold. Maggie was 54, blonde hair going gray in streaks she'd stopped trying to hide. She wore paint-stained jeans and an oversized flannel shirt, men's large, the fabric soft from decades of washing. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. On that same chain, hidden beneath her collar, hung a gold wedding band. Every painting in the studio shared a theme repair. Cracked pottery with gold veining in the kintsugi tradition, split wood rejoined with visible dowels, torn fabric sewn with contrasting thread. None of them were finished. She'd start with energy and hope, then abandon each piece when it came time to complete the healing. Her current project dominated the largest easel, a workshop interior, photorealistic, every detail rendered with obsessive precision, empty of people, but full of ghosts. Light streamed through one window, illuminating dust motes suspended in air. Tools hung organized on the wall, but one space on the rack remained conspicuously empty where a wood chisel should have been. She'd been working on this painting for 7 months. Couldn't finish it. Couldn't stop trying. The radio played oldies softly. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. The clock read 9 in the evening. She should eat something, should sleep, should do any number of things responsible adults do. Instead, she mixed burnt umber with ultramarine, trying once again to capture the exact quality of shadow in that long-ago workshop. Her phone rang. The sound shattered her concentration. Unknown number. Her instinct was to ignore it, but something made her answer. Mrs. Brennan. This is Sarah Mitchell from St. Mary's Hospital. The paintbrush clattered to the floor. Maggie sat down hard on her work stool. Is he? The question died in her throat. Your husband is stable, Sarah said with professional gentleness. He's been admitted for treatment of a neck infection. Surgery is scheduled for Wednesday morning. We're separated too. The words came automatically, a practiced response. Yes, ma'am. You're still listed as his emergency contact. Why? What happened? Maggie's free hand clutched the edge of her work table. Sarah explained cellulitis, foreign body, imaging, urgent surgical intervention required. The medical terminology washed over Maggie, but certain phrases stuck. Foreign body, 25 years, near the jugular vein, life-threatening if untreated. He asked that you be informed, Sarah added quietly. He doesn't have anyone else to call. I know, Maggie whispered. After hanging up, she remained on the stool as morning light crept through her skylight. The flannel shirt she wore, Tom's shirt from 1999, the one he'd been wearing that day, suddenly felt heavy. She'd kept it all these years, worn it as her painting shirt, and never once examined why. On the right shoulder, barely visible after countless washings, a faint brown stain remained. Blood, oxidized by time but never fully erased. Her fingers found the stain now, 25 years of wearing his wound as her penance. She made her decision in Seattle, 3 hours north. David Brennan sat at his desk in a minimalist apartment that could have belonged to anyone. 2 monitors glowed in the dim room code on one screen, Reddit on the other. At 32, he resembled his father more than he cared to admit. Same jawline, same tendency to carry tension in his shoulders, same habit of silence when words were needed most. He'd been scrolling through Irish Medicine during his lunch break when the post caught his attention. Unusual foreign body case in Portland. The original poster, someone with the username ER Nurse Emily, described a patient who'd carried a metallic object for over 25 years, recently presented with cellulitis, object located near the jugular vein, emergency surgery scheduled. The comments speculated about the object's origin. Shrapnel, industrial accident, attempted assault. David scrolled past the theories until he found St. Mary's Hospital, Portland. Patient is a maintenance worker of. His hand froze on the mouse. Another comment. Humble guy. Worked there 18 years. Never complains about anything. David's chest tightened. He checked his phone. Last call from his mother 6 months ago. Brief and strained. Last call from his father, never. 8 years since their fight. Since David had walked out saying words he'd regretted the moment the door slammed behind him. You're suffocating me. You're throwing away everything I built. It's my life, not yours. He stood abruptly, pacing his small apartment. One family photo sat half hidden on a bookshelf, the 4 of them at the beach, when David was 7 and Emily was 5. Before Emily got sick. Before death moved into their house like a permanent tenant. Before his parents became ghosts haunting their own marriage. David picked up the photo, his sister's face, forever frozen at 5. His parents, smiling in a way he'd never seen them smile after 1998. He grabbed his phone and dialed before he could talk himself out of it. David, his mother's voice, uncertain, as if she might have imagined his number on her screen. Mom, I saw something online. Is Dad okay? A pause, loaded with 8 years of absence. You haven't talked to us in 8 years. I know. But is he okay? She told him everything Sarah from the hospital had told her. David listened, his jaw clenching tighter with each detail. I'm coming home, he said when she had finished. David, I'm already packing. And by Tuesday evening, Tom lay in a hospital bed on the 4th floor, an IV drip feeding antibiotics into his arm, a monitor beeping steadily beside him. The window showed only the parking lot and rain. His dinner tray sat mostly untouched. The television remained off. The room felt dim and close. A nurse came in with pre-surgical instructions, nothing to eat or drink after midnight. Surgery at 7 a.m. Standard questions, standard answers. Then, do you have someone coming to be with you? My wife, Tom said. Maybe. The nurse's expression softened with practiced sympathy. Try to get some rest. After she left, Tom stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles, counting water stains, losing count, starting over, giving up. Through his open door, he could see other patients receiving visitors, balloons, flowers, laughter, the warm chaos of people who weren't alone. He got up and closed his door in the silence. The weight of tomorrow settled over him. Surgery, risk of bleeding, infection, nerve damage, death. If something went wrong, What would he leave behind? An empty apartment, estranged family, 18 years of mopped floors and invisibility. He reached for his phone. This time, he didn't stop himself. The phone rang once, twice, three tick. Hello? Maggie's voice, tentative and raw. His throat constricted. Maggie, it's me. Silence stretched between them, filled with 2 years of separation and 25 years of unspoken grief. I know, she said finally. Sarah called me yesterday. I'm coming tomorrow morning. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Another pause, and then Tom said something he hadn't said out loud in years, maybe decades. I'm scared. Her breath caught audibly. I know. Me too. I'll be there at 6. Okay. He swallowed hard. Maggie, yeah. Thank you. After they hung up, Tom lay back in the hospital bed and cried for the first time since Emily's funeral 25 years ago. The tears came quietly. A lifetime of held grief finding its way out through the cracks. At 9 that evening, Maggie loaded an overnight bag into her Honda Civic and drove through rain-slicked streets toward a hospital and a husband she'd spent 2 years avoiding. She passed their old house, sold last year, lights on for a new family, children's bikes on the porch where Emily's had once stood. She didn't stop, but she slowed down, memory flooding the car with the weight of everything they'd lost and everything she'd destroyed trying to escape the loss. At 10:30, she parked in the visitor lot, engine off, rain drumming on the windshield. The hospital entrance glowed ahead, warm and clinical. She couldn't move. From her purse, she pulled out the chain she wore around her neck and removed the wedding ring. Under the dome light, she read the inscription, worn almost smooth, T&M, forever. 6 feet das, 46 years ago. She slipped the ring onto her right hand, not the left, not yet, and opened the car door. Rain hit her face like a baptism. The security guard tried to stop her. Visiting hours. My husband. Pre-op. They called me. He checked his list and nodded toward the elevators. Maggie stood outside room 4, hand on the door handle, frozen. Through the window, she could see Tom silhouetting, smaller and more vulnerable than memory had kept him. The IV pole, the monitor, the hospital gown, all of it made him look mortal in a way that terrified her. Her hand pressed the door handle, but didn't push. Memory struck like lightning the workshop. 99, her hands on the ladder, anger like fire in her chest, because he wouldn't cry for Emily and she couldn't stop, because grief had made her into something she didn't recognize. The ladder shaking, his face as he fell, the sound of impact, blood spreading across blue-green flannel, her own screaming, 25 years of guilt crystallized into a single moment she relived every day. She pushed the door open. Tom stirred, opened his eyes, saw her backlit by the hallway. Maggie. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her. In the dim room, with rain tapping against the window and machines humming their electronic vigil, 2 people who'd spent decades married and years apart looked at each other across an impossible distance. Neither spoke. Words had failed them long ago. But Maggie moved to the chair beside his bed and sat down, and Tom's hand found hers in the darkness, and for the first time in 25 years, they held on. Dawn broke gray over Portland, rain still falling. Tom had been awake since 4:30, mouth dry from the NPO orders, nothing by mouth before surgery. Maggie slept in the chair, beside his bed, neck bent at an uncomfortable angle, one hand still loosely holding his. He watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall, memorizing the lines on her face that time it had carved deeper. When gray light finally filled the room, Maggie stirred and opened her eyes. They looked at each other, 25 years of marriage, 2 years of separation, one night of silent vigil. "Coffee?" Maggie asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Can't. Surgery?" "Right." She stood, stretching her back. "I'll get some for myself, then." "Don't!" The word came out sharper than he intended. "Don't leave yet." Maggie lowered herself back into the chair, perching on its edge as if ready to flee. Tom studied her hands, the way they gripped her knees. "How have you been?" he asked. Maggie laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Really, that's what we're doing. I don't know what else to say." She looked down at her hands. "I've been painting. Still. Always." A pause stretched between them. "What do you paint?" "Broken things." She said it quietly, without elaboration. Tom touched his neck where the bandage covered yesterday's examination. "The doctor said this thing's been in me 25 years. Nani, the workshop." Maggie's spine went rigid. "Do you remember?" Tom asked. "Every second?" "I've been thinking about it, trying to remember exactly what happened." He watched her face carefully. "How it got there." Maggie stood abruptly. "Tom, don't." "What? Not now, not before." The door opened. A nurse entered with an orderly pushing a gurney. "Mr. Brennan, it's time." The transfer happened quickly. Tom on the gurney, Maggie stepping back to give them room. As they wheeled him into the hallway, he reached out. She took his hand instinctively. He squeezed 3 times a code they developed 40 years ago. "I love you." Maggie froze. "You remember." "I never forgot." He looked up at her as the gurney began to move. "You needed to tell me something." The orderly steered them toward the elevator. "Ma'am, you can walk with us to pre-op." In the hallway, fluorescent lights passed overhead in rhythmic intervals. Tom stared at the ceiling tiles while Maggie walked beside him. "What did you need to tell me?" he asked again. "After," Maggie said, her voice barely audible. "I'll tell you after." Operating room 3 was precisely as cold and sterile as expected. Rachel Carson stood at the scrub sink, methodical in her preparation. Her team assembled: Martinez, the young surgical resident, 2 nurses whose efficiency spoke of years of practice, Patel, the anesthesiologist who would keep Tom hovering in that twilight space between consciousness and oblivion. Emily Chen stood in the observation gallery. She'd requested permission to watch, citing educational interest. The truth was simpler. She'd started this chain of events by refusing to let Tom stay invisible. She needed to see it through. Tom lay on the table as Dr. Patel administered the local anesthetic with conscious sedation. "You'll feel pressure, not pain," Dr. Patel explained, his voice calm and practiced. "Try to relax." "Hard to relax when someone's cutting your neck," Tom murmured. Nervous laughter rippled through the surgical team. "Doctor." "Hussos, dear." Carson made the first incision 4 centimeters along the sternocleidomastoid muscle, following the faint scar from 1999. Significant scarring, she noted aloud for the recording. This was never properly explored at the time of initial injury. She worked carefully, dissecting through tissue planes, avoiding the blood vessels that pulsed visibly beneath her instruments. Suction here. Deeper now. The capsule came into view, thick and fibrous. The body's attempt to wall off an intruder it couldn't expel. This has been encapsulated for decades, Dr. Carson said. Look at the organization of this tissue. Dr. Martinez held the retractors, pulling tissue apart to give Dr. Carson room to work. The object became visible through a thin membrane of tissue. Dr. Carson paused. That's not what I expected. Dr. Martinez leaned closer. His face went pale. He took a step back, then another. I need a moment. His hand covered his mouth as he rushed toward the door. Doctor! A nurse's voice, concerned. Martinez didn't answer. The door swung shut behind him. Dr. Carson continued working, but her movements had slowed, became more deliberate. This is a tool fragment, she said for the record, her voice carefully controlled, with organic material embedded, cloth fibers, wood particles. In the observation gallery, Emily's hand went to her mouth. She understood now. This wasn't just a medical case. This was trauma, preserved like an insect in amber, carried for a quarter of a lifetime. All right, Dr. Carson said. Let's remove this carefully. Stay close to the capsule. Don't rupture it unnecessarily. The dissection continued. The object loosened from its bed of scar tissue. Then sudden bleeding, dark and quick. Pressure here, now. A cautery smoke filled the air with its acrid smell. We may have nicked the capsule wall. Tom, drowsy but aware, felt the change in tension. What's happening? Stay still, Dr. Patel said near his ear. You're doing great. Almost done. The bleeding stopped. Dr. Carson completed the extraction, lifting the object with forceps. The room fell silent as she held it to the light. A chisel tip, perhaps half a centimeter wide at the blade, blue and green plaid fabric clinging to corroded metal, wood splinters from what might have been the handle, all of it encased in a matrix of fibrous tissue, the body's desperate architecture of protection. 25 years, Dr. Carson said quietly. Your body tried so hard to protect you from this. She placed it in a sterile container. Send to pathology. And save this for the patient. He might want to see it. Irrigation, antibiotic wash. A drain tube placed to prevent fluid accumulation. Layered closure, careful and precise. By 9 o'clock, Tom was in recovery, swimming up through station toward consciousness. Dr. Patel reduced the medication. Tom's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Is it out? His voice was thick, uncertain. Dr. Carson appeared in his field of vision. It's out. You did beautifully. What was it? We'll discuss it in recovery. Rest now. The recovery bay had curtains instead of walls, providing the illusion of privacy. Tom woke fully to find Maggie in a chair beside him, dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't left. Hey, Laura, he said. Hey. Deborah Carson arrived holding a clear plastic container. She set it on the bedside table where both Tom and Maggie could see. I want to show you what we found. Tom pushed himself up on his elbows. Maggie stood, moving closer. Inside the container, suspended in Selene, lay the object, metallic chisel tip, blue-green plaid fabric, wood fragments. Even preserved in solution, it looked wrong, a piece of the past that should have stayed buried. Tom stared. His hand moved toward it, then pulled back, as if the container were hot. Maggie saw the plaid pattern and felt the floor shift beneath her feet. She knew that pattern, Tom's workshop shirt, the one from that day in November 1999, the one she'd kept and worn for 25 years as her painting shirt. His blood-stain faded but never quite gone. She sat down hard. "You recognize this Carson asked. Tom's face had gone white. "Oh, God." He touched the bandage on his neck with shaking fingers. "I remember now. All of it." He looked at Maggie. "You were there." Tears spilled down Maggie's face. "Tom, you shook the ladder." Dr. Carson stepped back. "I'll give you both privacy, but I need to explain that infection risk remains despite removal. The next 48 hours are critical." Neither of them was listening. She left quietly, closing the curtain behind her. Tom and Maggie faced each other across the bedside table, the container between them like evidence at a trial. "I'm so sorry," Maggie whispered. "I've wanted to say that for 25 years. Tom didn't respond immediately. Pain showed in his face, physical and otherwise. "Why didn't you? You never brought it up. I thought you'd forgotten or blocked it out." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Forgotten I felt it every day." Maggie misunderstood. "The pain? The guilt?" She looked up sharply. "What guilt? You were angry about Emily." Tom said, "We both were. But I was trying to hold us together, keep us from flying apart. And you—" He couldn't finish. Maggie's hands clenched in her lap. "I was drowning. Our daughter died. You wouldn't talk about it. You just worked, built things in that workshop, while I fell apart alone." "I was working so we could afford the funeral," Tom said, his voice rising despite his weakened state. "The medical bills, so I didn't have to think about her empty room." His breath came faster. "So I didn't have to see the toys she'd never play with again. You never said—" "Neither did you." The heart monitor began beeping faster. Tom's blood pressure climbed. "You hurt me," Tom said, the words raw and decades overdue. "I know, but I hurt you first." His voice cracked. "I left you alone with grief. I couldn't face it, so you broke, and I bled." The monitor alarm sounded. A nurse rushed in. "Mr. Brennan, you need to calm down." Maggie backed away from the bed. "I should go." "No." Tom looked at the nurse. "I'm fine. I'll calm down." He breathed deliberately until the monitor quieted. The nurse gave Maggie a warning look before leaving. 5 more minutes, then he needs rest." In the renewed quiet, Maggie stood by the window, putting distance between them. Rain streaked the glass. "Maggie," Tom said, "I need to tell you something." She turned, her arms wrapped around herself. "I knew," Tom said. "What? That day, when I fell, I saw your face. I knew what happened." Maggie's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the windowsill. "You knew this whole time," Tom nodded. "And you never said anything." Her voice was barely a whisper. "No. Why?" The word came out as a broken sob, but before Tom could answer, exhaustion pulled at him. His eyes closed despite his efforts to keep them open. The pain medication in his IV was doing its work. "Tom, Maggie moved back to his side. Why didn't you say anything? His hand found hers weakly. Because, he murmured, already half asleep. I saw your face. You were already broken. I couldn't break you more. His breathing evened out. Sleep claimed him. Maggie stood beside his bed, tears streaming down her face, his hand still in hers. 25 years. He'd known for 25 years, and he'd stayed. Forgiven without words, carried both the wound and the secret, protecting her from her own guilt. The weight of it was crushing. Outside the window, rain continued to fall on Portland, washing nothing clean. By 2 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, Tom had been transferred to a regular room on the 4th floor. The surgery was complete. The foreign body removed, the wound closed and draining properly. He seemed stable. Maggie had left at noon, promising to return by evening with fresh clothes and toiletries from his apartment. Tom dozed between nurse checks, the medication keeping pain at bay. At 3 o'clock, a nurse took his temperature. 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, elevated from the morning's reading, but not alarming yet. Tom complained of feeling cold. She added another blanket and noted it in his chart. By 4 o'clock, his temperature had climbed to 101.2. Tom shivered despite 3 blankets. The drain output from his neck wound had increased, the fluid turning cloudy. The nurse frowned at the collection bulb, made notes, increased her monitoring frequency. At 5 o'clock, Tom's temperature spiked to 102.8. He'd become disoriented, speaking to people who weren't there. When the nurse came in to check his vitals, he looked at her with unfocused eyes and asked, "Emily, is that you, sweetheart?" She pressed the emergency call button. Carson arrived within minutes, still in scrubs from another procedure. She examined the surgical site, red, swollen, hot to the touch. The inflammation had spread beyond the incision. Tom barely registered her presence, mumbling incoherently about workshops and letters and things that needed to be said. "Get me a complete blood count, blood cultures, lactate level." "Dot," Carson ordered. "Start broad-spectrum antibiotics, IV push, maximum dose." Tom's eyes rolled back. His body trembled with rigors, violent shaking chills that no amount of blankets could stop. "We're moving you to intensive care," Carson said, though Tom couldn't hear her anymore. The transfer happened rapidly. Gurney, hallways blurring, elevator descent, the controlled chaos of the ICU. Machines multiplied around him. Monitors tracked every bodily function, their alarms creating a symphony of medical crisis. At 6:30, Maggie returned to room 4 carrying a duffel bag. She'd stopped at Tom's apartment, packed his things, picked up food she thought he might want. The room was empty. Stripped bed, no equipment, no Tom. Panic seized her chest. She ran to the nurse's station, the bag dropping from her hand. "Where's Tom Brennan?" Her voice came out too loud, too sharp. The nurse looked up from her computer. "Are you family?" "I'm his wife. He's been transferred to ICU 4th floor." Maggie didn't wait for the elevator. She took the stairs, her breath ragged, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. The ICU waiting room assaulted her with harsh lights and the quiet desperation of worried families. She approached the desk. "Tom Brennan, please, I need to see him." One moment, the wait felt eternal. Then Dr. Carson appeared through the secured doors, still in scrubs, exhaustion carved into her features. "Mrs. Brennan, Tom's condition has worsened significantly. He's developed post-operative sepsis, a severe infection likely from bacteria that colonized the foreign body over the years. When we removed it, we released those organisms into his bloodstream. His body is mounting a massive inflammatory response." Medical terminology washed over Maggie. She heard words: septic shock, organ failure, intubation, mechanical ventilation, but couldn't assemble them into meaning. "Can I see him?" Dart. Carson led her through the security doors, past bays separated by glass and curtains. She pulled back the curtain on Bay 7. Tom lay unconscious. A breathing tube down his throat connected to a ventilator that whooshed rhythmically. Ivies ran into both arms. Monitors covered every wall, displaying numbers and waves that meant nothing to Maggie. His skin looked gray, his chest rising and falling only because a machine forced it to. Maggie collapsed into the chair beside the bed. She reached for his hand. It felt cold and foreign. "Tom, I'm here." No response. The ventilator whooshed. The monitors beeped their mechanical vigil. At 10 o'clock that night, David Brennan rushed through the iced doors. He'd driven 3 hours from Seattle through rain and traffic, parked illegally, and run through the hospital. At the desk, he gave his name breathlessly. "Tom Brennan. I'm his son." They directed him to the waiting room. Maggie sat alone, a cup of cold coffee in her hands, staring at nothing. She didn't notice David until he spoke. "Mom." She looked up, confused at first, as if she'd forgotten he existed. Then recognition flooded her face. "David." They stood simultaneously. The embrace was awkward at first. 8 years of absence couldn't be erased by proximity. But then they both began crying, and it became real. "What happened?" David asked when they finally separated. Maggie explained everything. The surgery had been successful, but the infection had spread anyway. Sepsis, intubation, ICU, critical condition. "Is he going to die?" David asked the question Maggie couldn't voice. "I don't know." David sat beside her in the plastic chair. "I thought when I drove here, I don't know what I thought, that he'd be okay, that we'd talk, that I could apologize for the fight, for staying away." He put his head in his hands. "But now—" "I know," Maggie whispered. They sat in silence, listening to the quiet sounds of the ICU distant monitors, hushed conversations, the ventilators breathing for people who couldn't breathe for themselves. "Tell me about this thing in his neck," David said finally. Maggie told him. The workshop accident, 1999. The chisel fragment. 25 years of silent infection. "I remember that workshop," David said. "I was 7 after Emily died. Dad spent all his time there." Maggie's hands tightened in her lap. "I pushed him." David turned to look at her. "What? The day he fell, I shook the ladder on purpose." The confession came out flat, practiced from years of internal repetition. "We were arguing about Emily, about grief, about everything falling apart. I was so angry. I shook the ladder. He fell." David stared at his mother, processing. "Did he know?" "He knew. He told me yesterday. He's always known." Her voice broke. "And he never said anything? 25 years. David, he forgave me, and never told me he forgave me. And I've been destroying myself with guilt. And now he might die. And—" She couldn't continue. David put his arm around her shoulders. They sat together in the fluorescent purgatory of the ICU waiting room, a mother and son reunited by crisis, waiting to see if the man who connected them would survive the night. Outside, rain continued to fall on a city that never stopped moving, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in rooms full of machines and prayers and hope stretched thin as surgical thread. At 2 in the morning, Thursday, David dozed fitfully in a waiting room chair while Maggie sat awake, staring at her phone without seeing it. The ICU was quieter at this hour, though never silent. Machines breathed for people who couldn't breathe alone. Medications dripped into bloodstreams. Life continued in increments measured by monitors. Carson passed through the waiting area, heading toward the coffee machine. Maggie stood immediately. "Doctor, any change?" Carson turned, her face showing the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift. Stable, not improving, not worsening. The next 24 hours are critical. We'll know more by tomorrow evening. Maggie nodded. Sitting back down, David stirred awake, disoriented. "Mom, no change," Maggie said before he could ask. They sat in silence. The wall clock ticked. Somewhere down the hall, an alarm sounded and was silenced. David rubbed his face, trying to wake up fully. "Mom, I need to tell you something." He paused. "About why I really left." Maggie looked at him, waiting. "It wasn't just the fight about my career. That was the excuse. The thing I could name." David's hands clasped together. "The truth is, after Emily died, the house felt like a mausoleum. You were grieving in one room. Dad was grieving in the workshop. I was 7 years old, trying to understand why my sister was gone, and neither of you could talk about it. The silence was suffocating." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "I know you were both hurting," David continued. "I understand that now. But as a kid, I thought you'd stopped loving me. That losing Emily meant losing everything. So when I turned 18, I left, and I kept leaving. Every phone call I didn't return, every holiday I missed. I was still 7 years old, still running from that silent house. David, I need to tell you something else." He pulled out his phone. "About the day Dad fell, I was there." Maggie went very still. "I was in the workshop doorway. I heard you fighting. I saw you shake the ladder." David's voice was steady but quiet. "I saw Dad fall. The blood, your face, everything. You were 7, Maggie whispered. "You saw—" I didn't understand what I was seeing. Not then. I thought it was an accident. But as I got older, the memory stayed with me. The anger in your voice, your hands on the ladder. And I started to wonder if maybe it wasn't an accident, if maybe—" He trailed off. "That's why you left," Maggie said, understanding flooding through her. "Not just the grief. You were afraid of me. I was confused. I loved you both. But I couldn't reconcile what I'd seen with what everyone pretended happened." David looked at his mother directly. "Did you mean to hurt him?" "No." The word came out fierce and immediate. "God, no. I was angry at everything. God, cancer, the universe, and he was just there. I wanted to shake him out of his calm, make him feel something, but hurt him, never." "Did you ever tell him?" Maggie shook her head. "Not until yesterday. 25 years of guilt. And then I found out he already knew. He saw my face when it happened. He understood it was an accident born from grief. He forgave me that day and never told me. David absorbed this. So, you've both been carrying this separately all this time? Yes, that's... David stood up, paced to the window, came back. That's the most Tom Brennan thing I've ever heard. Suffer in silence. Protect everyone else. Never ask for help. It is killing him, Maggie said. It killed our family, David replied. They looked at each other, seeing clearly, for perhaps the first time in decades. He mentioned a letter, Maggie said, when he was delirious yesterday. Before the infection got bad, he kept saying something about the letter and the workshop. What letter? I wrote him one. November 1999, 3 weeks after the accident. An apology, an explanation. I rewrote it 1,000 times, never sent it. Maggie pulled her purse into her lap. I still carry it, always have. Did he write you one? I don't know, but if he did, it would be in his apartment. She looked at the clock. We could go check. The ICU won't let us see him again until morning anyway. David pulled out his phone. I have the key. They gave it to me with his belongings. By 7 o'clock Thursday morning, they stood in Tom's apartment. David entered first, fumbling for the light switch. When the overhead bulb flickered on, revealing the sparse, lonely space, he stopped in the doorway. God, Dad. Maggie stepped in behind him. She'd been here once before, dropping off mail a year ago. The emptiness had shocked her then. It shocked her now. This wasn't an apartment. It was a cell someone had chosen to inhabit. Where would he keep it? David asked. They searched methodically. The closet yielded the answer. A shoebox on the top shelf. Exactly where someone would hide things they couldn't throw away but couldn't bear to look at. David pulled it down. Mom, here. Inside, they found the archaeology of grief. Photographs from the workshop, Emily's hospital bracelet tiny. Impossibly tiny. Her name printed in faded ink. Divorce papers from 20%, and an envelope addressed to Margaret in Tom's careful handwriting, dated November 15th, 1999. Maggie took it with shaking hands. He never sent it. Do you want privacy? David asked. No. Stay. She opened the envelope carefully, as if it might disintegrate. The paper inside had been folded and unfolded many times. Tom had read this over the years. The handwriting was his younger self's, more confident, less worn. Maggie read aloud, her voice breaking. Dear Maggie, I know what happened that day in the workshop. I saw your face when the ladder moved. I saw the horror the instant you realized what you'd done. I want you to know that I don't blame you. I blame cancer. I blame God. I blame myself for shutting you out when Emily died. You were broken, and instead of helping you, I built things, as if sawdust and wood glue could fix what leukemia had destroyed. I chose to stay with you not out of obligation, but out of love. I forgive you. I forgave you that day. I'll forgive you every day for the rest of our lives if I need to. Maybe someday we'll talk about this, or maybe we never will. But I wanted you to know I understand. I love you. I'm not going anywhere, Tom. Silence filled the apartment. Maggie copied openly, the letter shaking in her hands. David put his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes wet. He knew, Maggie whispered. He always knew. And I tortured myself for nothing. Not for nothing, David said quietly. You both suffered. Just separately. Maggie wiped her eyes. I have mine too. Same date. She pulled a worn envelope from her purse. I've carried it every day for 25 years. Read it. David took the letter. His mother's handwriting, also younger, also dated November 1599. He read aloud. Dear Tom, what I did is unforgivable. I hurt you. I see your face when you fell every time I close my eyes. I was so angry at Emily's cancer, at God, at you for being so calm when I was drowning, but anger is no excuse. I still love you. I don't deserve to, but I do. I don't know if we can survive this. I don't know if you can ever look at me the same way, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I'll be sorry every day for the rest of my life. Maggie? David held both letters, one in each hand. You wrote the same day. You both apologized. You both said you loved each other, and neither of you sent them. 25 years, Maggie said. We've been carrying the same burden separately all this time. You're both idiots, David said, but his tone was gentle, almost affectionate. Complete idiots. Maggie agreed. Back at the hospital by 10 o'clock, they found the waiting room buzzing with unexpected activity. A social worker named Sarah Mitchell approached them. Mrs. Brent and I have been trying to reach you. Something unusual has happened. She explained a nurse named Emily had posted about Tom's case on a private medical forum. The story had spread to social media. By Thursday morning, Tom's story was being shared across Reddit, Twitter, and Facebook. Maintenance worker carries foreign body 20 years had become a trending topic in Portland and beyond. Someone started a GoFundMe, Sarah said, pulling it up on her tablet. Maggie and David stared at the screen. The fundraiser, created by a stranger named Jennifer Morris, described Tom's situation, a humble hospital maintenance worker. No family support, incorrect. But the initial information had been limited. Decades of hidden trauma. Now fighting for his life. The goal was $20,000. Current amount raised $18,400. This is... Maggie couldn't finish the sentence. People care, Sarah said simply. The comment section is full of similar stories. Veterans carrying shrapnel, workers with industrial injuries, people who've suffered in silence. Tom's story resonated. David scrolled through the comments on his phone. Hundreds of them. We're praying for Tom. Essential workers deserve better health care. My father carried pain his whole life. Never spoke about it. This hits home. Thank you for surviving. Your story matters. These people don't even know him, Maggie said. But they care anyway, David replied. Among the comments, David found messages from Tom's co-workers, Walter from maintenance. Tom's the best guy I know. Never complains, always helps others. Glad people finally see him. A Dr. Tom had probably mopped floors for. I'm ashamed I never learned his name. He's been part of this hospital for 18 years. There were messages from neighbors, from people who'd lost loved ones to silence, from veterans who understood carrying invisible wounds. The internet, for once, had become a force for connection rather than division. David looked up from his phone, his expression thoughtful. Dad spent 18 years invisible. 25 years carrying that thing, and it took almost dying for people to finally see him. We see him now, Maggie said. We should have seen him before. Maggie nodded, acknowledging the truth without defending against it. Sarah cleared her throat gently. There's more. The hospital administration has agreed to cover Tom's remaining medical expenses beyond what the GoFundMe raises. The publicity has been significant. They want to do the right thing, so he won't have to pay anything, Maggie asked. Nothing, Sarah confirmed. David and Maggie looked at each other. The financial burden that had been crushing became weightless. $23,000 from strangers, the hospital covering the rest. An impossible gift born from impossible circumstances. "Can we see him?" Maggie asked. Sarah checked her tablet. "ICU visits are restricted to 15 minutes every 4 hours. The next window is in 20 minutes. They waited. David showed Maggie more comments, more messages, a whole digital community that had formed around his father's suffering. It was overwhelming and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. When the 15 minutes arrived, they were escorted to Tom's bay. He looked the same, unconscious, intubated, gray, but the monitors showed slight improvement. Temperature down to 100.2. Blood pressure stabilizing. Small victories measured in numbers. Maggie took one of his hands. David took the other. "We read your letter," Maggie said to Tom's unconscious form. "Both letters. David found them. We know now. We understand." "You're not alone, Dad," David added. "You've never been alone. We just forgot how to say it." They stayed for 15 minutes, speaking to someone who couldn't hear them, hoping somehow the words would reach him anyway in whatever darkness he inhabited. When their time was up, they returned to the waiting room to discover the GoFundMe had climbed to $23,400, and the comments kept coming. Hundreds of strangers sending love to a man they'd never met. United by the recognition that suffering in silence was too common, too accepted, too deadly. Tom Brennan had spent 18 years invisible, now fighting for his life. The whole world was watching. Well, Saturday morning arrived with the first break in the rain. Pale sunlight filtered through the ICU windows, tentative and fragile. Dr. Carson made her rounds at 8 o'clock, studying Tom's vitals with cautious optimism. Temperature 99.1 degrees. The first time below 172 hours. Blood work showed the infection markers decreasing. His respiratory rate had improved, breathing spontaneously over the ventilator's rhythm. "Let's try extubating him," Dr. Carson told the respiratory team. Maggie and David sat in the waiting room, unaware that the tide had turned. They'd been there for 3 days straight, leaving only for brief showers and changes of clothes. The GoFundMe had reached $23,800. Messages of support continued flooding in from across the country. A respiratory therapist appeared in the waiting room doorway. "Mrs. Brennan, we're removing the breathing tube. He's strong enough. You might want to be there when he wakes up." They rushed to his bay. Tom lay still as the team worked, removing the tube carefully. He coughed violently, gasping, his eyes flying open. An oxygen mask replaced the tube. His lungs worked on their own. "Breathe," the therapist encouraged. "You're okay. You're doing great." Tom's eyes darted around the room, disoriented and afraid, until they landed on Maggie. "Maggie," the word came out hoarse, barely audible. "I'm here." She moved to his right side. David took his left. Tom looked between them, confusion giving way to recognition. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "You came?" "Of course we come to Wahoo," David had said, his voice thick. "We never left," Maggie added. Tom's hands found theirs, his grip weak but present. "I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought I'd die alone." "No," Maggie said firmly. "Never. I'm sorry." Tom looked between them. "For all of it, everything." "We read your letter," Maggie said. "We went to your apartment. David found it." Tom's eyes dilated slightly. "You went—" "We needed to understand," David said. "You kept talking about a letter when you were delirious." Maggie pulled the worn envelope from her purse, the one she'd carried for 25 years. "I have mine, too. Same date, November 15th, 1999. Tom stared at the envelope, then at her face. "You wrote one?" "I've rewritten it in my head 1,000 times. Never sent it." She handed it to David. "Read it to him." David read both letters aloud, his father's and his mother's, written the same day, saying nearly the same things, never sent, carried separately for a quarter century. When he finished, silence filled the bay except for the steady beep of monitors and Tom's oxygen hissing softly. "We're idiots," Tom finally said, a weak smile crossing his face. "That's what David said," Maggie replied, crying and laughing simultaneously. "Complete idiots." Tom agreed. Over the next 5 days, Tom's strength returned incrementally. The drain was removed. He graduated from oxygen mask to nasal cannula to room air. He walked the hallway with assistance, then without. Color returned to his face. Visitors came Walter from maintenance with a card signed by the entire department. Emily, the nurse, who'd started everything, bringing flowers and apologies for posting his story. "Don't apologize," Tom told her. "You saved my life, more than once." On Tuesday, Sarah Mitchell visited with the news about the finances. The GoFundMe raised $23,400. The hospital is covering the remaining $17,000. Your out-of-pocket expense is $0. Tom sat speechless. Maggie gripped his hand. "People care, Dad," David said. "Strangers care." Sarah showed him the comment section on her tablet. Tom read silently, his eyes moving over hundreds of messages. "You're not invisible. Your story mattered. Thank you for surviving." "I spent 18 years invisible here," Ned said quietly. 25 years carrying that thing. Took almost dying to be seen." "We see you now, T," Maggie said. "We always did," David added. "We just forgot how to say it." Dum was discharged Friday afternoon with strict instructions for wound care and follow-up appointments. David had extended his leave from the work. The three of them, Tom, Maggie, and David, drove together to Maggie's house. The first time they'd all been under one roof in 8 years. The house felt different, warmer. The converted garage studio held evidence of Maggie's 25 years of artistic processing paintings of broken things, all seeking repair. None quite finished. Tom walked through slowly, studying each canvas. "You've been painting me," he said, understanding dawning. "All of these? You have been trying to fix me over and over." "I couldn't fix you," Maggie replied. "I broke you." "We broke each other, and we're still here." David watched his parents, seeing clearly what he'd been too young or too wounded to understand before. Their marriage hadn't been perfect, but it had been real. The silence that had driven him away had been grief, not indifference. The distance had been protection, not abandonment. "I'm going to stay for a while," David said. "Take family leave, help out, if that's okay." "More than okay," Tom said. That evening, they ordered pizza and ate around Maggie's kitchen table. Simple conversation. David talked about his work in Seattle, his girlfriend Shura he wanted them to meet. Maggie shared stories about the local art community, a gallery show she'd been invited to participate in. Tom listened more than he spoke, but his silence felt different now, not withdrawal, but presence. 6 months later, spring arrived in Portland with characteristic tentative sunshine. The old workshop had been restored through their combined efforts. Half remained Tom's workspace tools organized, workbench refinished, the smell of wood and oil persistent but no longer overwhelming. The other half stayed Maggie's studio easels, paintings, the creative chaos of art in progress. Between them, they'd created shared space, a place where past and present could coexist without warfare. Sunday dinners became tradition. David drove down from Seattle every other weekend, sometimes bringing Sarah, who the Brennans welcomed with the fierce affection of people who'd learned not to take connections for granted. On a prominent shelf, visible from both the workshop and studio sides, sat a glass case, inside preserved in clear resin, was the chisel tip that had lived in Tom's neck for 25 years. A small plaque read, "What I carried, what I released." Beside it, the 2 letters, November 15th, 1999, laminated and displayed, not hidden, remembered, transformed. Tom's scar remained visible when he turned his neck. People asked sometimes. He told the truth. Long story, good ending. On a Sunday afternoon in April, Tom and Maggie worked side by side. He at his bench refinishing an antique table, she at her easel finishing a painting she'd started years ago. David and Sarah sat nearby, David teaching his girlfriend basic woodworking joints, while Maggie offered color theory advice neither of them had requested. The radio played oldies. "You Send Me" came on their wedding song, the song that had been playing the day everything broke. Tom and Maggie looked at each other across the workshop. No words needed. They'd found new language in the silence, not the suffocating kind that had nearly destroyed them, but the comfortable quiet of people who'd learned to speak before silence became a weapon. "You know what I realized?" Tom said to the room at large. Everyone looked up. People asked if I'm angry about the 25 years, carrying that thing, the pain, the infection. He touched his neck scar absently. "I'm not angry. Every scar tells a story. This one taught me that silence isn't strength, that carrying pain alone doesn't protect anyone, and that healing—" He looked at Maggie, then David, then back to his work. "Healing happens when you finally let someone else help carry it." David smiled. Sarah squeezed his hand. Maggie set down her brush and crossed to Tom's side, looking at the table he was refinishing. "It's beautiful," she said. "It will be," Tom replied. "Takes time, patience, the right tools, in the right hands," Maggie added, outside. Spring rain began again, gentle this time, washing Portland clean. Inside the workshop studio, 3 generations worked in companionable silence, the kind that held love instead of grief, presence instead of absence. Tom Brennan had carried a foreign body for 25 years, but what he'd really carried was silence, guilt, grief, and the weight of trying to protect everyone else from his own pain. Now, finally, he'd learned to set it down. The ending wasn't perfect. Tom and Maggie were dating, not remarried. Healing moved slowly. David still lived in Seattle, his own life built there. The scar on Tom's neck would never disappear. But they were together. They were talking, or they were seen. And sometimes that's all the healing anyone can ask for. The end. Tom Brennan carried a piece of metal in his neck for 25 years. But what really almost killed him was something far more common: silence. How many of us carry wounds we've never spoken about? Letters we wrote but never sent. Apologies we rehearsed in our minds for decades but could never voice. Tom spent 18 years walking hospital corridors, invisible to everyone, convinced that suffering alone was strength. It took a near-death experience for him to realize that the bravest thing he could do was let someone see his pain. His story reminds us that it's never too late to break the silence, never too late to reach out to the child you haven't spoken to in years, never too late to forgive yourself for mistakes that happened decades ago. The weight you're carrying doesn't make you strong, it's just heavy. And somewhere, someone is waiting for you to finally put it down. So, here's my question for you. What letter have you been carrying unsent? What burden are you tired of holding alone? Share your story in the comments below. You might be surprised how many people understand exactly what you've been carrying all these years. You're not invisible, not anymore.